So this is 1880 China by Double O Games, and it's time to have a look at the foreign investors. Our players have been rearranged in order of least money, Train Mad Tina, to most remaining money, down here, Cautious Kate at the end. And now in that order, from right to left, clockwise, they get to choose a foreign investor, just for free. So foreign investors look like this. They've got their own little charter. There are 7 in the game. Obviously we'll have 5 in play because there are 5 players. So each turn at the start of the operating round, but in numbered order, just after the private companies pay out, they will get to build or upgrade a track tile. Then they will get to run and make a nominal run from their home station, which is printed on the map, using whatever the currently available train is. So at the moment it's a 2 train, but once all those are sold it will be a 2+2 and then a 3 and then a 3+3, and then they stop operating when the first 4 train is bought. But they still exist, as they'll still have their charter with any cash in their treasury. It's just they won't operate anymore. So they'll then operate, and then they're done. Much like they don't get to buy trains or anything. They simply build a track tile and then accumulate income in their treasury. When the player owning or with a investor launches their first share company, one of these with their own company charter, one of the shares will go in this spot here to the investor, and when they hook up those 2 companies, they will get that share for free, as well as a 50 yen bonus, and they can also choose what to do with the cash that the private investor has accumulated. They can either move it all from the investor into the company that they've just linked it to, or they can move 20% of it into their own pocket and lose the rest. And finally, and also quite interestingly, is that for free, the company they've just hooked up with can exchange one of their station tokens for the investor station token. And what that means is that you can end up with a station token in an off-map area like this. So, you know, you could end up with a station token in here with 2 routes out, a bit like a city, and, you know, an increasing value up to 60, which is going to be as good as I think Shanghai at the end of the game. So, you know, there's some interesting things there as well. So we have Russian investors, we have Japanese, we have Belgians, Germans, British, Portuguese and French, and the only difference between them is the turn order for them and where they are placed on the map. So the Russians are up here in an off-board major city. So this run into this counts as a major city with 2 exits, 20, 30, 40, 50. The Japanese are based in this city, Dalian, here on the coast. The Belgians are just outside Beijing here, with this very easy early hookup, which won't give the company enough time to accumulate cash. The Germans are based on the coast here. The British are based out of Hong Kong, a major city right down here, 2030, 1070. So during the communist era, the value of Hong Kong goes down massively and then ramps up massively again once they come out of it. The Portuguese in this tile here, right next to Haiku, and the French out of French Indochina, as we've seen. The difference between the blue and the red, and this is something I've not seen in a 18xx game before, is obviously they're both off-map areas that you run to via the arrows, but the reds count as major cities. These are called, what are they called? These are ports, but these are called harbours or something. Yeah, harbours, I think they're called, and they only count as minor cities. So you could make a run, you know, with a 2+2 or a 3+3 train, and these would only count as one of the +3 rather than one of your major cities. So they're quite cool. There's Haiku there, Taiwan down here as well. So there's a couple of those that only count as minor cities. Anyway, that's a rundown of the investors, and it's a question of each of the players looking at what they think the prospects for these are and how they fit in with their sort of, well, what their private companies are and what they might want to be looking to do. Okay, a quick look at the private investors chosen by each of the players then here. So our first player, Train Martina, who is going to be opening the BCR, chose the French investors because it looks like there's some potential synergy between her starting position here and her river company, and hooking them up with the French investors reasonably early once. But it looks like there's quite a rich terrain round here where they might lay some less than straight track round here, up towards her, and that would free her up to build over in this direction towards the coast, or more up towards the more central areas towards Beijing, while the investors do the work of sort of hooking up towards her. So that was her thinking. Brian here, balanced Brian, chose the Russians, and he is thinking that this officer gives him the ability to build all game with his starting company or with one of his companies. There are 4 phases in the game, A, B, there are 4 lettered phases in the game, A, B, C and D. This gives him a D work permit, and the most you can have normally is 3 phases, A, B and C, or B, C and D. So he can start a company that can work all game, and so for that reason he decided that he's going to aim for a central-ish position somewhere around Beijing, and therefore have a company that can be operating all game and can therefore keep him with sort of income and share increment, capital gains from share prices going up all game. And so that's what he's looking to achieve, and he thought he would therefore take the Russians, who could build him some track from the top left corner and down towards Beijing while he established a central position. So that's his hope. Reckless Rob here took the British. He had to have a good long think, but he's got the Taiwan Western Line, which he's got to try and exploit. He needs to get value out of this, and so it makes sense to be aiming for this corner, and if he's got the British, they can be building track again up towards Taiwan and out of Taiwan, or that can hook him up with whatever corporation he chooses. So he thought he'd let the British do the work of building the track up to Taiwan and out, if he can work out how to get that done with the available tiles, and that again frees him up a little bit to establish a position with maybe one of these corporations, Shanghai and Nanjing, this one here out of Wuhan, that one there potentially, so one of those. Paul then had to have a think. Paul had to have a think because he's got the ferry company and he wants to be using the coast as well, wants to be using these ferry lines. He had to weigh up the fact that he looked like he was going to be competing with Reckless Rob for that coastal territory quite a lot. So he went to the other end of the country and took the Japanese. I don't think the Japanese are popular from what I read, but they looked like they'd work with his ferry company, and again he looks like he can use the Japanese investors to build from here, maybe north up to Vladivostok up here, or maybe fill in bits and bobs around the coast, while again he establishes some board positions somewhere in here with his actual corporation. And that left Cautious Kate with a difficult choice as well. She actually went for the Portuguese in the end. It was between the Portuguese and the Germans. So the Portuguese, the Germans are here. They don't really have, they have to build their own area before they even get to expand outwards, and they haven't got a lot around them apart from the ferry line down to Shanghai. They can build over in this direction, I suppose, but they've got a few tile lays before they start actually getting a run. But they were central and close to Beijing up here. The difficulty with the Portuguese is that they are, you know, on the edge of the map and therefore more difficult to link to, but they look like they've got safer income prospects. They're in a very populous area with lots of cities around them. They can hook up with their first tile lay to this harbour and be making, you know, money straight away. And she preferred them making money straight away than the uncertainty of the Germans, especially with two other players very clearly competing in that area and possibly screwing up the track lays as far as her investors are concerned. So she decided to come down here and take the Portuguese. Now she's got the same problem here with the British being involved and potentially screwing up the track lays around here, but at least she's got a sort of you know, if they build into here, she's building into here. She's probably always got somewhere to go. As long as it's over towards the left, she may struggle to build track up towards Taiwan, but she thinks she'll still have options there. And so that is that's the private companies that we've got. So these two go back in the box, the Belgians and the Germans, and that's good. I won't mix their flags up. And just completely unrelated to that, then, one absolutely vital piece of information in the whole game that I haven't really touched on is the way the game phases change. Game phase changes are based around what the sale of the first of each type of train. So you've got the train type down here. When the first one is sold, you move into that phase. So at the beginning of the game, we've got yellow tiles available. Corporations can own 4 trains. Capitalisation is with 50% of shares. Companies open with when 20% of their shares are bought. So the first director certificate at 20% or higher, and there are only 5 shares available in any one corporation. The 2+2 train sale doesn't change anything, but the 3 train moves us into phase B, which is important for work permits. You'd need a B work permit to lay track in this phase. So if you started a company and it only had an A work permit, you'd no longer be able to build track. The green tiles now become available, and a lot of rules change. Companies need 30% of their stock sold to open. All 10 shares rather than 5 are available. Companies can now lay 2 yellow tiles. They can buy trains from companies with the same director, so you can swap trains between companies, and companies who've only had 50% of their capital so far receive, with all their shares sold, receive their other 50%. So they become fully capitalised as long as they've sold half their shares. B2, with the sale of the 3+3, drops the train limit to 3. The sale of the first 4. What's this? That's rusts the 2 trains. So the 2 trains are destroyed by the sale of the first 4 train, and the communist takeover stops the share prices changing. It means you can't sell director shares. Private companies stop paying out. Foreign investors become inactive, and companies open at 40%. Then we sell the first 4+4, rust the 2+2, brown tiles become available. First 6, rusts the 3, and companies open with 60% of their shares sold now. And the 2 trains become re-available as a sort of legacy train. They cost 250 each, but they don't count towards certain things that I'll explain later. The sale of them does not count as the sale of a train for purposes of moving the game onwards, basically. And the stock exchange reopens. When the 6E sells, it rusts the 3+3, and the train limit drops down to 2 per corporation. The 8 rusts the 4s and makes grey tiles available, and also triggers the start of the end game. Once the second 8 is bought, you can see we have the last stock round, and then each company operates 3 times. and we've got 8Cs that can rust the 4x4, and then 10s that don't do anything, and then, you know, after we've done our 3 operating rounds, we end the game and count up cash. So that's a very important chart as far as knowing where you are in the game and what's on the horizon, and what trains are about to rust, and what track upgrades are about to become available, and how the capitalisation of the companies is going to go. So yeah, let's crack on. We've done the foreign investors. So now I need to set Train Martina up with the BCR, which is her, and she gets 20% off, and then we can move on with a round of share purchasing as other people establish corporations they may want to run. So let's just talk a little bit about establishing a share company at the start of the game here. When you establish a company, you get to choose whether your director's certificate is going to be worth 20, 30 or 40% of the company, and you get to set a share price, and that will determine a number of things. Now I'm pointing the camera at the BCR here. Actually the BCR, because it's set up through this Imperial King government with 2 shares, so a 20% stake, it's the one company in the game that doesn't get to choose. It automatically starts with a 20% director's certificate. And the reason that might prove to be important is because there's a limit to the number of these certificates you can have. So I think in a 5-player game you can have 14. So obviously if one of your 14 is worth 40% of a company rather than 20%, then come the end of the game you can own a larger proportion of companies if you've got 3 40% or 2 40% rather than 2 20%. So the advantage obviously is it's much more efficient to own a single certificate that's worth a greater proportion of a company. However, the impacts of whether you take 20, 30 or 40% are, well, there's a couple. The main one is your work permit for that company is based on whether you take 20, 30 or 40%. If you take a 20% director certificate, you get a work permit for 3 phases. Which can either be A, B and C. They have to be consecutive, so it has to be A, B and C, or you can choose B, C and D. If you take a 30% stake, you only get a 2-phase work permit, A, B, B, C or C, D. And if you take 40%, you only get a 1-phase work permit, A, B, C or D. So, you know, your ability to build track is directly linked to what proportion of the company you take as your director's share. Obviously also setting the share price determines your initial capitalisation of the company. So at the moment companies with a 20% stake sold, so as soon as a director's share is sold at any level, they are operational, and when a company becomes operational at the start of the game it receives 50% of its capital, share capital. So in other words, the starting share price times 5. So in this case the BCR, it's always the same. It launches at 20% at 100 per share, so it gets a 3-phase work permit and 500 in capital in its treasury. So over here, Brian has been making some decisions as to what company he wants to launch, what director certificate he wants to take, what share price he wants to launch it at, and what he can afford to launch it at based on his based on how much cash he's got, and so on. So he has decided to take the Jingha Railway here out of Beijing. We'll have a look at the map in a minute, but I don't want to keep moving the camera backwards and forwards. But it's out of Beijing, out of northern Beijing. He has taken a 30% share in the Jingha, which means he has had to set the initial share price at 90 to be able to afford the 30% stake. So it only gets a work permit for 2 phases. So he's taken A and B, and it only gets 450 in capital because he's had to set the share price at 90 to be able to afford the 30% stake. And that reminds me I've got to do something over here. So when you launch your first company, your private investors get a share set aside of that company, and when you join these two companies up, you get that share for free. That's the share you get for free, so it's set aside for you in the investors company manifesting charter. So Brian set up the Jing Ha here, set it at 90, and taken a 30% stake. So a couple of things to mention. So because you can take 20, 30 or 40, there are a variable number of 10% shares left. And because at this phase of the game only 50% are available, there's a little card in the stack of shares that says this company is now sold out. And if you hit phase B and you've sold all the shares, then the company then receives the rest of its capitalisation, and so you exchange this card for the rest of your money. In other words, another 5 times your initial share price comes into your corporate treasury, and now all the rest of the shares are up for sale. So 40% of this company is now sold because he's taken 30% and the foreign investors have got a 10% stake, and there's 10% of the Jing Ha still up for sale. So that's going back on the stock market there. And just to give a little indication then of what Brian is thinking, he's got the Jing Ha here. He's got the Russian investors up there. He's hoping to be able to establish a nice solid network up in northern China without too much competition, because there's not much else up here. He doesn't think that anyone's going to be opening the BZU because he's got too much influence in this area to build the track he wants. He's hoping to be able to link up to Russia, Vladivostok and Beijing and establish a nice sort of cosy power base up here. He might then try and obtain the BZU later when all the track's been laid for it, and he can take it at a 40% stake in it and not care that it's only got a one-phase building permit, because all the track's already been laid that it really needs. So that's the way he's looking at things. And his other thought here is that he could take a 30% stake and miss out building in phase C, because phase C is the brown tiles, and when he looked at the brown tiles, it was an upgrade to Beijing, which he thinks will happen anyway. Shanghai, which he's not interested in, it's down on the southeast coast, and a load of OO cities, which are the double cities like this, or the double. There are some towns on the map where the players get a choice. So these dots with a circle around them can either be a small city or a large city. So that can either be a small 2 towns or a double city, depending on who lays the first tile in there. But he hasn't really got any of those. There's this place over here, and all the rest of it is singles. That's got to be a double small town. There's no choice. And so, does he care about upgrading the 00 city tiles? Not really. So he thought he'd wait that phase, and who knows, by then he might have established the BZU and be able to fill in with a C work permit for the BZU. So he's trying to find some synergies there and hoping to establish a northern sort of power base for himself, relatively uncontested, with all these private investors competing with each other for the southern territory. So now I've got to make similar sort of decisions for the other 3 players. Am I going to talk through them all? I might well do, because this is the kind of stuff that these are the sort of founding decisions on which the sort of gameplay is then sort of gonna build on. I don't think these are the kind of games where you can make that kind of decision and then suddenly change your mind and try and set up an empire. And here, once you've made these choices, you're kind of committed to that course of action. And so we'll see what the others want to commit to as well. So one other super important thing to note, which I forgot to mention last time, was that as you set the initial share price for a company, you put a marker down in the turn order chart, and this turn order is then fixed for the rest of the game. So the BCR always starts at 100, and so the BCR player gets to choose one of these 4 slots, 1, 2, 3 or 4, for where the BCR is going to operate in the game. And in this case chose the top slot, so it's always operating first. Reckless Rob, who's just set up the Hukun Railway out of Shanghai at 100 per share, chose this spot, so second spot, whereas the Jingha Railway, which was only set at 90 per share, had to take this spot down here, and so leave the potential for other companies to operate before it. Again, Brian wasn't too worried about that because he didn't think he'd have too much competition for the track lace. He may prove to be wrong, but he didn't think so. But the HKR has taken this second spot, parred at 100, and the Rob's taken a 30% stake for a 300 investment, and has taken an A and B work permit. So we've just got Paul and Kate to do, and we'll be ready to go into an operating round. Well, actually, I think once you've done this, you can also then buy shares in other things. I think the share round continues. You can't sell shares in this opening phase, but I think players with sufficient cash to invest in other people's companies could also do that if they wished, or could set up a company with a 20% stake and then go round again and buy another share if they wanted the ABC or BCD work permit. That would also be viable. So for example, Paul might only take a 20% stake at 100, but then buy another 10% share of his own company so that he could have the work permit and the 30% stake, albeit in 2 certificates. Anyway, 2 more decisions to make for 2 more players, and then we'll be into some operating rounds. So the last 2 players here. Payout Paul set up this Nanjiang Railroad, which is next to Shanghai here. He set it 100, and he set his marker right next to the marker for the Hong Kong, for this Hukun Railway out of Shanghai. And so he figures he can't really be blocked out, because whenever the HKR does something, he'll be next to act. So for example, the moment Shanghai's upgraded, he's next to act, he can token it, and so he's going to be able to compete or to act and to run in all the coastal routes. He hopes, he thinks, you know, because when you upgrade you know, when you upgrade Shanghai to this S tile, he'll always be the player with the choice to token it, because he'll be next to act, or he'll be the one that upgrades Shanghai and then tokens it. So he reckons he'll get access from there into the coastal routes, and he's got a clear idea of how he can link up with his Japanese investors up here. And so that then left Kate, cautious Kate, with a problem. She was looking at where to launch. Tactically, you have to be aware of certain things. These double O cities start with this tile, which is a dead end, which makes certain things look quite unattractive when you realise that, because it looks like you're going to run out of track lays very quickly. For example, if you started here in Beijing, built into this town and then built into here, you'd end up with 3 tiles of track, and then you couldn't build anywhere because you've got no expansion opportunity. And similarly, certain things like starting here means you're going to be pointing out in one direction, and you could get quickly locked into something that you don't want to be doing. So that didn't look very good, because until the OO cities upgrade, it just looks like it might be very tight in terms of its options and its earning potential. Because if you buy 2 trains, where are you meant to run the second train? You'll only have 1 stretch of track, you know, and you want 2 different stretches of track to run 2 trains. So it just looks like a poor starting location until later in the game. This is just trapped in between these investors down here are going to start building track out, and this, which gets 2 track lays a turn, it looked like it could get overrun with track lays around it that didn't suit it. That looked dangerous. And then you're starting to come up here, and this is in the middle of nowhere. What's it going to link to? And it's sort of in the sphere of influence of 2 other companies that are acting before it. So what she eventually decided on was to stake a claim out here and aim to build in that kind of area south of Beijing and try and have some initial control over how this area develops in terms of the board position. So that's what she decided to do. We then went round again and pay out Paul, invested another 100 in his company and bought another 10% share, and Kate could have done the same because she's still got 190 in cash, so she's not heavily, she's got lots of money not invested, but that's cautious Kate for you. And it also gave her the priority marker, so she gets a choice, and she quite likes that position because she might have 200 to spare to set up another company and capitalise a second company, and she'll get the first choice of which one to pick, so she can watch what happens and how things develop through this operating round, and then have the first choices of how to develop things next time out. So she quite likes that position, and yeah, we are ready to go into some operations. And I'm going to end it here and do that on the next one of these I do.